Welcome to another edition of College Basketball Coast to Coast. I'm Matt Zemek. He's Ari Russell. Another big full-service Saturday of college basketball conference action all across the country. That's why we call this College Basketball Coast to Coast. And so, Ari, as we start, it's the SEC, and we just watched some really entertaining late night games with Kentucky. Kentucky led by 13, lost the whole lead, but then rallied late to beat Mississippi State. And then the game that ended just after that, Alabama over Texas A&M, an absolute war on the glass. And Alabama with 3 offensive rebounds on a late game possession, leading to a made three-pointer. Alabama delivers the knockout punch, but Texas A&M without Wade Taylor made Alabama scratch and claw for every point, every loose ball until the very end. I mean, Texas A&M, they get Wade Taylor back. Like, they are just going to be an absolute handful. They were still a handful for Alabama, even short-handed. So, Ari, your reaction to the big games in the SEC today?
We're always, every show is pretty much going to start with what happened in the SEC because there's so many great matchups. But what a way to close the night tonight with Texas A&M and Alabama. I mean, no Taylor, but just another. Again, I've been saying this from when we started doing these shows, a week and a half ago. That Texas A&M is a team that I think is one of the dark horse problems in the ACC. In the SEC, not necessarily going to win the conference, but is going to cause problems. Obviously they don't have one of their key best players tonight at home. Alabama is one of the favorites to be a Final Four. They're definitely a national championship contender. Top 5 right now, probably going to be top 4, 3, perhaps, after tonight. They go into College Station and they pull off the big victory. Despite them being shorthanded, the Aggies. So I have to say this, it's always hard to get road wins, no matter where you're at, no matter what conference that you're in. Tonight Alabama really handled what they had to handle. They closed out that game. That sequence where they had 3 offensive rebounds and Mark Sears misses his first. It was someone else missed the shot. Mark Sears ends up getting the 3, misses his first 3 attempt. Then offensive rebound by Alabama. Kicks it back out to Sears again, misses his second 3-point attempt. Again, another offensive rebound by Alabama, kicks it out to Mark Sears, finally nails the 3. Big game for him in general. I think he had like 27, or actually may have been close to 30 tonight. With all the free throws at the end. But ice cold at the end. That's what he does. Sears, he's just unconscious. And you can't get those second chance points. And that was I think that put them up by 7 at that point. And, the Aggies still, had about a minute 45 left, and they still brought it within 3 at one point, but they just weren't able to really close that deficit enough. And it was the offensive glass. Alabama, I think, had 27, 28 offensive rebounds. But Texas A&M was also very active as well. They had 23 and 24 themselves on their side. I mean, that's insane numbers from both ends. If you look at tonight's game, also a tremendous amount of fouls. It was like 50 some odd fouls they mentioned at the end of the game. And it wasn't like this was a very, poorly offensively played game. You're going to get a lot of offensive fouls if both sides are very active on the glass. You don't see that where both teams have over 20 offensive rebounds. That just shows a tremendous activity effort on both sides of the ball. Very physical, teams. Like I said, I'm a big fan of Texas A&M, but Alabama is really, they're a legit contender, and tonight they showed it going into College Station and getting that victory.
Given the today's results in the SEC, I mean, we had 4 high-profile teams going on the road against robust opposition and getting wins. We had Florida winning in Fayetteville in Bud Walton Arena. We had Kentucky, as we mentioned, beating Mississippi State. And we also had Tennessee going into Austin and beating Texas. And Texas led for a good chunk of that game, but down the stretch, Tennessee's defense locks in. You have
Don't miss
a sense
Auburn.
of
Don't
how
miss
to,
Auburn. Don't forget Auburn. Auburn goes into
with
Austin.
Deni Broom getting hurt, and that was a
With him
gutsy
getting
win
hurt.
with Deni Broom. I would say South Carolina not quite on the same level as Mississippi State, for sure. We can debate perhaps Arkansas, but yes, it's definitely worth including.
I meant Columbia. My bad. I'm getting mixed up.
But Ari, any sense of like I mean, they're all impressive, but which win impressed you a little bit more? Tennessee, Kentucky, Florida, of those. Like Alabama beating A&M, that's the best road win, I would say, of any SEC team. But of those other ones, Kentucky in Starkville, Tennessee in Austin, and Florida in Fayetteville. Any sense of how to weigh those different road wins?
Florida's winning Fayetteville. Look, like Arkansas right now is struggling. They're 0-3 in the conference. That's not the start that Calipari wanted. They really needed this win today. Tough game, close, but Florida, had a decent amount of, like, I felt like they led for much of the second half. Arkansas just wasn't able to really sustain any type of momentum enough for them to gain any lead and to pull ahead. They're struggling, that's a close loss, but I'm impressed with what the Gators have been able to do. Obviously winning by 30 this week to Tennessee. I mean, they're shooting up. They're going to shoot up the rankings. They're going to clearly be a top 10 team at this point. You have to, but that was an impressive win in Fayetteville, getting that win over Cal Squad. Arkansas struggling though. Like, what's up? They need a win. 0-3 is not the anticipated start that the Pig Suey was expecting this year. So they really got to pick themselves off the mat. But Florida, went in, and that's a tough place to play, and they got the win. So that's the most impressive win. I at the least out of all the top teams, I think, even though Broom's injury is very significant. That's a huge injury. They still pulled off the win, but South Carolina, it was too close for comfort, in my opinion. Even without Broom, like they're not really they're like we said, they're really at the bottom barrel of the conference. One of the teams that I'm not expecting to do much. And they, Auburn, got the win. So I wasn't particularly that impressed. I thought they should win by double digits on the road. Texas, not shocking that it was closer than it probably should have been, because Texas is very good defensively. So, I thought that Tennessee handled the business that they were supposed to on the road, got the win. Outside of that, and then Kentucky going into the hump. Not an easy place to play, going to Stark Vegas, baby. I don't know if you've ever been there. You got to fly into Columbus, Mississippi. It's about a 25-minute drive. I've been to the Applebee's in Columbus, Mississippi. Let me tell you something. That's an experience. Also went to the Kmart there as well. Didn't get any ammo or any long guns, but I'm pretty sure that they sell those. I needed like a flashlight or something for some broadcasts we were doing at the time. Anyway, went to the hump. That's a great stadium, great atmosphere. Kentucky handling their business against a very, very good Mississippi State team as well. Big time road wins by, really the class of the conference today in the SEC.
My brief thought about Florida, Ari, is that when the Gators have a really, really good team, you can always point to a junkyard dog in the paint. It was the meat hook, Dimitri Hill on the 1994 team under Lon Kruger. In 2000, Udonis Haslam, the enforcer. 2006,
and
Noah and Horford.
Yeah.
Yep. 2006, Noah and Horford, particularly Noah, just a mean, nasty guy, and I say that affectionately. In the paint. And in 2014, Patrick Young. So when Florida has it going, there's skill in the backcourt and there's real sharp steel in the front court. And Todd Golden has that mixture with Florida. I want to ask you about Kentucky, though. Let's pivot to Kentucky. We haven't dug into that Mississippi State game as much as some of the other SEC top teams. So Kentucky wins, and it was a great display of shot making, of late game offense. But we're noticing Kentucky's giving up a lot of points. You
Oh
know,
yeah,
80s at Georgia, 90s here, gave up 100 to Florida, and like
yeah,
so, hey, they're skilled, you know, and they're in position to win a track meet. If they play a track meet, you know, they're in position to win that. The Gonzaga game was also a really high scoring game that they won in Seattle. But that defense, Ari, how concerned are you about the Kentucky defense under Mark Pope?
yeah. I mean, if team shoots 40% from three, they're gonna have problems. And even in transition, their transition defense needs a lot of work. And I'm pretty sure that Mark Pope is going to address all these things. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, you know, they're going to beat you in the track meets 9 times out of 10. So like, I feel like they feel confident enough that they have the they have the guns, they've got the dogs in the race to be able to run those track meets well. And we've seen it, like Florida track meet with them, they win that game 106 to 100, right? Yeah, Georgia track meet in that one weren't able to pull that one off. We'll get to Georgia in a second, by the way. But yeah, Kentucky's defense on many fronts, perimeter defense, transition defense, needs a lot of work. But man, their offense is really electric. And when it's getting going, and when they hit shots and they move the ball around really well, and they're very balanced, and they got a lot of guys that can score, put the ball in the hoop. A lot of weapons, very diverse. It's a fun team to watch, man. But yeah, their defense. If there's another team out there that really can lock in on them, especially when you come tournament time, and slow them down a bit. That's the one thing, and it has a little bit of offense. That's some of the concerns that you're going to have down the stretch when the games get a little bit tighter. But when you got these track meets, my money's going to be on Kentucky 9 times out of 10.
You briefly alluded to Georgia, so let's
Oh
tackle
yeah,
Georgia. The thing that strikes me about Georgia, and Mike White is there. I just have to marvel. Mike White could have dug in his heels at Florida. He could
yep,
have tried to stick it out. He wasn't fired. He jumped.
yep.
Like that was beginning to be a pressure cooker. It was reaching the boiling point. But White wasn't fired. He had some good seasons there, but instead of trying to stick it out, he went to a place with less pressure, went to a place with lower expectations. And some people might say, Mike White didn't ride it out fully at Florida. But you know what? Sometimes you need to know what your niche is. Sometimes you need to know where you're going to be effective, the job that makes sense for you. Not everybody can be the ringleader of an elite program where the expectations are the highest. Sometimes the niche is go to the programs that don't expect as much and try and build the culture there. So, Ari, I'm going to ask you about Georgia as a team and just your impressions of this win over Oklahoma and where the Dogs are heading this season. But just my observation is, what an astute move by Mike White, knowing his limitations. Not
Well, yeah,
every coach does that. I'm just impressed that he knew it was time to shift places, and he was willing to give it up at Florida. He could have been the successor to Billy D, trying to replicate Billy D's successes. He gave up on it, and some might say he quit, but he knew what his strengths were. He knew where his place was. There's a lot of maturity there, actually.
yeah, and I'm pretty sure. If I'm not mistaken, I think Georgia actually offered him a little bit money than he was getting, more money than he was getting at Florida anyway. So it was kind of like one of those moves. It's just like a lateral move. However, you end up making more money, and you're not dealing with the pressure. You're not following, the legend of Billy Donovan, which was a lot of pressure. You got to make Final Fours and win championships, and that's not going to happen at Florida all the time. But Billy Donovan built that program for those expectations to be there. So there are impossible expectations at Florida. There's a lot of big egos, and there's a lot of, I guess, banging heads in that program with the football program. And the football program hasn't been to what their expectations have been for a long time there in Florida. So there's just a lot of, chatter and talk and alumni's, money people that are going there. And and Mike White, if I'm not mistaken, made one or two Elite Eights. Not bad. Didn't make Final Fours, but In fact, probably overachieved with some of the rosters that he had at Florida, and was able to advance further than even though the expectations that the program has. So, Georgia comes along, he gets the offer, and I believe, there's no pressure at Georgia like that. There's pressure at every place, and especially in major college basketball. But Georgia basketball is not the pressure cooker that you're going to have. They don't have history like Florida has history, right? As far as more recent history, let's say, if we're talking the last 20, 25 years. Lon Kruger was very solid, but then Billy Donovan brings it to, a dominant program. And, we're talking about, that those are pressures and they're impossible pressures. So he goes to Georgia. And the expectations at Georgia are not to win national titles or even make Final Fours. The expectations are, we'll be happy if you make the NCAA tournament. So, so someone like that especially, he's a really good ball coach. And we're starting to see that there's not those pressures that are necessary for him. So he doesn't have those unrealistic pressures, because they are unrealistic pressures, for him to actually have to make the Final Four. There's only 4 teams that make it every year. The math doesn't work out for the expectations, for the fans and the donors and everybody in the NIL at this point. Georgia doesn't have that. That's the football people to worry about, right? Basketball, no. So he goes there to Georgia, and this is like the biggest, strongest year that the conference has ever had. And look at them now. That I don't know how many games they're going to lose in Athens, but I'm telling you, I watched the game today. That's going to be a death trap for everybody. And that team is physical. They get at you. You're not getting shots. You're not getting open shots. I think they're one of the leading teams in the country in block shots. They average about 5 or 6 a game. Today they had 7 or 8. You're not, rim protecting. It's just that's typical of Mike White's team. Very physical, getting at you, making it very difficult for you to get close range shots. But he doesn't have that pressure. So yeah, it was a very strategic move on his point for his career. But I'll be honest with you, Florida sucks. I wouldn't want to coach there. It sucks because the expectations are impossible. And when you go to places like that, what's the point? What's the point going there? Because you're going to fail, even if you succeed greatly, that everyone else would consider great success. But if you're not winning national titles because of Billy Donovan, then you're not winning it. So, though right now it's interesting because you don't want to be the person that replaces the legend. You want to be the guy that replaces the guy that replaces the legend. And Florida's kind of dealing with that right now. So, but in my mind, Mike White made a brilliant, personal decision. Obviously, business-wise, for his own sake, Georgia gave him a good amount of money, probably a little bit more than Florida was paying him at the time. Doesn't have the pressure, and he seems pretty relaxed. And Georgia is a team to look out for in the SEC right now.
Let's move to the Big East.
Yes.
UConn made a really big statement against Georgetown. You watched a lot of that game. And then in prime time in Madison Square Garden, boy, St. John's and Villanova trading haymakers. And people who didn't watch the game, they're going to see St. John's winning by, I believe it was 12.
Yeah.
This was a one-bucket game until the final about a minute 15 left. So do not be fooled. This was a one-bucket game nearly the whole way, but St. John's makes the plays late. Huge win for Rick Pitino. That team seems to be really solidifying itself, establishing itself as an NCAA tournament team, but Villanova and Eric Dixon putting up a fight. So what do you take from that game and also from UConn's win over Georgetown?
Well, let's start with the St. John's game. Watch pretty much, most of that game, pretty much the whole second half, in particular, because I was bouncing around trying to watch as many games as possible. So, but in that particular game, it was 1 or 2 possessions throughout the whole game. It didn't change until like the last 2 minutes, where St. John's pulled away. Much of it just Villanova not hitting their shots. Eric Dixon had a very off game today. Shot. I think he was like 6 for 16 from the field. Not his best performance by any stretch. Credit to St. John's for finding ways to disrupt him. Keep hands in his faces, double teaming him a lot, really making it difficult for him to get it off. Poplar had a pretty solid game himself. Outside of that, Villanova didn't play terrible, but St. John's was very disruptive, very physical. This was a very physical game. Talk about this, Luis Jr. The guard for he's a big guard. He's about 6'7", right? For at a huge game, 30 points. Put this, maybe had 16 of those points at the free throw line today. So they were really getting to the stripe. St. John's was today by just banging it down low and driving to the hoop a lot and just throwing their bodies around. And the game was like an old school Big East game today. And St. John's just has a lot of length on the perimeter and very physical and really had a great game plan against Eric Dixon, something that UConn wasn't able to do earlier in the week. It seemed like Pitino figured out a really good game plan to neutralize him and to not make him as effective. I mean, he still had, 15, 16 points today, maybe 18 or something like that at the end, which is still pretty good, but about 7 points below his average. So that's significant. They lost by 12, but again, it was a 1 or 2 possession game throughout. Saying again, and we said this earlier in the week. What you asked me, who's better between St. John's and Villanova, and I said yes. It depends on who's playing at home, and in this case, it was at MSG. St. John's had the home court advantage. It was back and forth throughout, and St. John's pulled it out. My expectation is that when it goes to Villanova next, it's going to be a very similar game, and I wouldn't expect that result to be different. However, Villanova actually getting that win. These teams are very close. Villanova, to me, I saw them. They seem, even though they had a sluggish start in the out of conference schedule, they are a legitimate tournament team and a team that I would not want to face. Eric Dixon is legitimate, a player of the year candidate in the country for Naismith, legitimate. And, because the NBA scouts are morons, because he's an older player, that he's not going to get drafted in lottery, though he should be. He reminds me, he's a little bit bigger than Draymond Green, but his game is very similar to Draymond Green. Inside out, two-way player, very physical, just very smart, high basketball IQ. So like if I was a GM, he's a guy that was going to end up on the Heat or on the Spurs because everyone else likes these, tall, lanky, athletic guys. I'm taking Eric Dixon 9 times out of 10. But I tell you what, Pitino had a great game plan today, executed it. St. John's, legitimate tournament team, and at this point more than last year. I don't. They're not a bubble team. To me, they're going to be a team that is easily into the field. And okay, then we got to go to Georgetown, UConn, right? So in this one, Georgetown had a great start to the Big East season. I mean, as we say all the time, the first 2 minutes of the second half are often the most important minutes of any basketball game at any level, right? And today against UConn, it was a 4-point UConn lead going into the half, and Georgetown did a good job of whittling down. It was like 8 or 9, and they brought it down to 4 at half. So I'm watching. I'm like, okay, Georgetown's in striking distance, and then those first 3 minutes of the second half, and then it's boom. It's already double digits, right? A couple turnovers. I think that they had 5 or 6 turnovers in the first 4 or 5 minutes of the second half. Georgetown did. And all those were executed into points. There was like at one point, it was like an 11-0, 11-1 run by UConn. And any Hurley team that does that, and we've seen the last several years, the last 2 years in particular, the back-to-back championship teams, as soon as you have that second half double-digit deficit against UConn, it's a wrap. Not only that they smell the blood and they curb stomp you. And they did that today. They got it up to like 21, 22 points. Yeah, it was an 8-point loss by Georgetown, but it was much more larger deficit throughout the second half. They just smothered them. They looked like the UConn of what we've seen the last several years. Finally, I'm not shocked rather that they did that today. Mainly because I wasn't expecting them to lose back-to-back games. two road games. Obviously lost to Villanova by a possession and a missed free throw. Apparently, Alex Karaban missed free throws, gets home late night that night, and is in the gym and shooting free throws at 2, 3 in the morning. Empty gym. That's what they said, right? Karaban had 18, 19 points today, including 3 huge dagger threes. Like every time it looked like Georgetown made a shot or they missed a shot, maybe somewhat within striking distance. Caravan goes in, boom, step back three, boom, off a screen three. Hit 3 of those today in the second half during a stretch, and that was just lights out. And that's what they do. That's what UConn does. They find that time. They smell that blood. As soon as they smell it, they take advantage of it. And this is what they've done the last several years and why they won back-to-back national championships. And today they showed me kind of the Danny Hurley basketball culture that exists in that program. And now, even though it's a completely different team than it was the previous 2 years, is showed it today against Georgetown. They were like, nope, like Georgetown's a good team, but nope, it's not going to happen today. Nope. And they showed it. And UConn today really played the part that makes them scary. And they scared me today because they would just look like what they did during both their last 2 runs against Georgetown, who's a really good basketball team. So they didn't shoot the ball well, Georgetown, but they got smothered because they weren't getting open shots. They were just harassed defensively. I still think Georgetown's a tournament team. UConn is an elite top line team again. And even though they don't have McNeely, they didn't need him today. They get him back. My goodness, man. Whew. So, again, three-peat, baby. It's possible. I watched that today. I'm like, whew. That's a really good basketball team again.
All right, let's move to the Big 12, Ari. And I think the headliner is Iowa State beating Texas Tech in overtime. And Iowa State tied that game at the buzzer at the end of regulation. And that's the kind of win that it gets a team a number 1 seed. You win all of those or nearly all of those 50-50 games on the road. Iowa State's a better team than Texas Tech, but you're going to step into an occasional pothole on the road. But when you're able to pull those wins out of the fire, that's how you get a number 1 seed.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, today was one of those gut check games, and let me tell you, Texas Tech, again, we talked about this before, those middle level teams, the Big 12, man, there's a lot of them, and Texas Tech is in that mix too. They're very athletic, some great guard play. Point guard had a phenomenal game, true freshman, man. Woo. You got JT Toppin there, also had a big game. They had it, man. They had that win, and they just couldn't hold on to it. And that's just Iowa State really is one of they're looking like a 1 seed, and that type of victory in overtime just kind of shows you that separation from them and the rest of the conference. Maybe Houston and Kansas. It's going to be Houston, Kansas, Iowa State battling. Then everybody else in the middle is going to be battling a lot as well. So it'll be interesting to see how it all shapes out. Texas Tech showed me some things today that I was impressed with, that I think that they, have tournament team, a tournament team possibility, bubble team possibility. They're going to have to win some of these games that they have to win. They're supposed to win. Today, they weren't expected to win, obviously, heavy underdog. But they went toe-to-toe with, one of the best teams in the country, and Iowa State, historically hasn't been a great offensive team, but this year, are much better offensively than they have been. And today, they really, came through in the final few seconds there in overtime. That layup, that move at the end was Jefferson hit it at the buzzer to bring it into overtime, and closing it out at the end was just an impressive victory by the Cyclones. They're a legit contender as well. Complete team, a lot of depth, plays very physical offense, defense, just very skill, high basketball IQ, takes takes a lot of the personality of their coach, kind of like what UConn does with Hurley. And this year they have some offensive weapons that can put the ball in the hoop. And today it showed. And hats off to Texas Tech, giving it all they could. They just missed it by a few inches today. But that was probably one of the best games of the day was Iowa State Texas Tech. Very entertaining.
Let's look at the lower end of the Big 12. For the most part on this show so far, we've talked about the success stories, the big wins, the teams that are impressing us. But we have to talk about some teams that are being disappointments. And so in the Big 12 today, Kansas State just gets knocked out early by Houston, non-competitive at home in Bramlage, where you'd think the Wildcats would at least put up a fight. And then you also have Cincinnati scoring just 40 points at home against Kansas. And Bearcat fans are beginning to worry that Wes Miller is not up for this, that he's not going to be able to get it done. Which maybe they're both on the same plane, but would you say that one team is in particular crisis mode, or do you basically think they're both in pretty much the same boat at this point? Is there one team you'd lean to as like the bigger disappointment? Because like Kansas State made big transfer portal investments, and Coleman Hawkins, from Illinois, that hasn't really worked out. But on the other hand, you could say Wes Miller, like his coaching star was on the rise, and he was supposed to figure it out at Cincinnati, and it's not happening. So give an assessment of those two programs who really are trending in the wrong direction right now.
Well, I mean, Cincinnati is what 0-3 or 0-4 in the conference right now. That's not the start they expected. They had a pretty solid out of conference, beginning, and obviously were ranked before the Big 12, season began. And right now they're got a goose egg there in the win column. That's a bigger disappointment than Kansas State. I think Kansas State at least is like 1-2. I think at this point. So at least they have one win. At the same time, Cincinnati has also probably had a little bit more of a rougher beginning schedule than Kansas State has had. Probably because all three of Cincinnati games have been. It's not like they're massive upsets. They're against teams that were previously ranked or should have been ranked and are ranked. Today they lost at home to Kansas, and Kansas is kind of a little bit behind the eight ball from the preseason expectations, but now it seems like they're, a little bit getting there. They seem to be righting the ship a little bit. That's back-to-back road wins, if I'm not mistaken. No, they had the Fog Allen win earlier in the week, and
but they beat UCF by 51 on the road. So yeah.
Well, UCF
had a really good week.
UCF is going to be at the in the basement this year in that conference, and not saying that they're a terrible team. It's just the Big 12's got a lot of good teams, and UCF is not really a good team. So I'm not saying they're terrible, but they're not going to get many wins there this year. But Kansas is really righted the ship, and Cincinnati, that's a tough start, and that's a momentum thing too, and a confidence thing. Like starting 0-3 is tough, man. Like Wes Miller is going to have to get that team to dig in to start 0-3 in the conference. At least getting one win. On the other side with Kansas State, losing at home, but they got drilled. So it's they were having high expectations, but it's very hard to really bring teams together when you get all these transfers, like figure out how it's all going to work and put things together like that. So, Big 12, again, not as strong as the SEC, obviously, but let me tell you, like those middle teams there is a lot of really good basketball teams. And Kansas State, they're good in the middle there. They're not going to be a top tier team in that conference, But man, they're going to have to really start. They're going to have to beat, these middle teams. They're going to have to, Texas Tech. They're going to have to compete against Baylor. They're going to have to get a win here or there, against Cincinnati, and Cincinnati vice versa. Like at this point, it's just finding wins. And Cincinnati needs it more because they got that goose egg. But these things can start unraveling fast, and the confidence levels can go in the direction you don't want them to go in. Conference basketball is a knock 'em out, drag 'em out ordeal, and these days with these massive conferences and these kind of imbalanced schedules, it's very difficult to kind of measure where we're going to see things in the next 2 months, like 6 weeks per se. But it's definitely not the start that Wes Miller wanted in Cincinnati, uh, and as well with Kansas State. It would have been nice to at least see it be a little bit more competitive today and a little louder.
No doubt. Other scores that caught our attention today at college basketball coast to coast: USC, 13 and a half point underdog. No one gave USC much of a chance. And hey, my day job, my regular job is Trojans Wire. So I blog about USC sports. I wasn't giving USC any sort of chance. And keep in mind, Ari, Kasparas Jakušionis, the excellent scorer for Illinois, was not in the lineup today. And so people might say, well, that's why Illinois lost. But Illinois drilled Penn State by 39 without Jakušionis earlier in the week. So they were able to play without him. They were able to play well without him. USC just comes in there and punches Illinois in the mouth. Your reaction to really one of the day's biggest upsets in Champaign?
Yeah, that was one not expected. Considering USC, seeing kind of how they performed early on in the Big Ten conference, at home so far, and then they go on the road to Champaign, which is a very tough place to win games, and a raucous arena there, and they pulled it out, and I was noticing early on in that game, I'm like, they got some guys, man, like. It's not a team that is pushovers. They've got some size on the wings. And they really took it to Illinois today. They really were physical, especially on the boards. I saw them just crashing. It seemed like all five guys were coming in crashing following their shots, and it did seem like Illinois. It felt like they didn't know that the game started at noon. I felt like they may have thought it started at 1:32 because that was just one of those games today. We've seen them play Illinois, throughout this season, especially early on, going on the West Coast and beating Oregon, beating the dust off of Oregon, and then, taking down Washington and Seattle, and then obviously, beating Penn State by, a large margin, and then coming home on Saturday, and it just seemed like maybe they're hungover. I don't know. Like, maybe that was too much. They just didn't look like they had the legs today. And USC got to give them credit for coming out here and getting that victory. That was a must win for USC almost. Huge victory, and it's going to be huge for their confidence. So they're like, all right, we can go on the road in this conference and beat one of the better teams, on their turf. So hats off to USC and the Trojans. Wasn't expecting that. That was by far the biggest upset of the day. Unexpected. And, Illinois is going to have to get off the mat because that's a tough loss. And I don't think they expected it. And I'm sure Brad Underwood is going to be getting under their tailpipe. And it hasn't already done that throughout the rest of the day today. And they're probably going to have their next tough practice whenever it is. It's not going to be a good practice for that team because they did not show up today at all. And hats off to USC. But that was a huge upset.
How big here? This is a wild stat, Ari. This is USC's first ranked road win. First road win against a ranked opponent since 2010. So, Andy Enfield never got a ranked road win in his 11 years on the job. Eric Musselman does it in his first season. So that gives a little bit of perspective on how unexpected this USC win over Illinois was. Gonzaga trailed Washington State for much of the first half, and Washington State was looking ahead to Gonzaga Thursday night, loses to the Pacific at home, an absolutely horrific loss for the Cougars. So, I was expecting Washington State to bring it, and Wazoo did bring it for a half. And you mentioned the first 2 minutes of the second half being really important. Gonzaga hits Washington State with a 8-0, punch to the teeth at the start of the second half and just pulls away for what became an easy win over Wazoo. Is Gonzaga getting its groove? I mean, and people will say, well, it's just the WCC, but nevertheless, Gonzaga has played much better basketball these past few weeks, and Mark Few, ironing things out. This is the time of year when he solves problems. He addresses flaws with his team, and then by late February, early March, we know the drill here, right, Ari?
I mean, first off, Gonzaga always plays one of the toughest non-conference schedules, brutal, so you can't really look at it that way because they play one of the toughest schedules of anybody, uh, non-conference, because the West Coast Conference isn't particularly that competitive. I mean, yeah, you've got some good teams in there, historically St. Mary's, and now obviously you got the Washington State, the Pac-12, Pac-10, Pac-8, whatever the hell the conference was. Um, Pac-2 now in their conference. So it makes it a little. Those are more robust programs, generally speaking, to bring in than some of the others in that conference. But they usually do start getting it together in conference because the competition isn't as high, and they're way closer to the competition of who they play, at a conference generally. Uh, so Washington State, a team, yeah, I was, again, had early lead, but not shocked that Gonzaga pulled away. They did handle their business. Uh, I expect them to do that the rest of the season here. I don't think there's anyone in that conference that's going to be much of a problem. But what it does is it gets them to get their kind of you know situation handled, and Few figures out the identity of the teams throughout their conference play. They start to get into more rhythm, as you say, catching their groove. Yeah, this is the time when Mark Few starts building that January, um, figuring out how that team can start being effective, more so. And again, a lot of turnaround, a lot of different players on this team than a year ago for the most part. A few moves outside, Um, but yeah, I think they're going to be fine. Like who's going to challenge them really in that conference this year? St. Mary's has really historically been the only one recently, but I expect them to run that conference as they have, even with Washington State and Oregon State in there. Oregon State is not relevant. Washington State, somewhat, but nah, they're going to run through it as normal.
Oregon State losing to Santa Clara Thursday night. The Beavers also have lost to Loyola Marymount. So it really does seem as though the two-pack, Washington State and Oregon State, moving into the WCC. It's been rough sledding the past few weeks for those teams. So it does set up the familiar Gonzaga-St. Mary's clash at the top of that conference. You also had Santa Clara beating San Francisco in an eye-opening result. Santa Clara pulling away in the second half for a win over the Dons. So it really does seem as though it's going to be Zags and Gales, even with Wazoo and Oregon State now in the WCC. All right, Ari, before we close our show, we haven't talked about the ACC. We have Duke beating Notre Dame, and Pat Kelsey making his statement for National Coach of the Year. Obviously, it's the middle of the season. We have 2 months of basketball left, but, Kashawn Pryor was a really, really important cog for Louisville, and he's out for the season. And Kelsey is coaching around that roster limitation. They fall behind by 7 points to Pitt early, but they get that win. So Duke at the top. Louisville seems to be the best of the challengers, certainly after a road win at Pitt and then a home court win over Clemson. Are we looking at an ACC in which it's Duke 1, Louisville 2, and then the rest, or are there other plot twists that you see in this conference and how it's all going to shake out?
I mean, yeah, Duke is hands down by far going to run away with this conference. Cooper Flag with 42 points today, breaking the all-time freshman scoring record single game. for Duke. Not a shock. And look, Notre Dame played them tough today, and for the most part, as tough as they could have. But Duke gets that win. Outside of that, it's like, all right, who else might make the tournament? So what are we looking at, right? Looking at Louisville, who you mentioned. They're 4-5-1 now. Big win, as you said, significant win. Clemson with a commanding win today as well over Florida State. I think they won by 22-21. So Wake Forest is, I think 4-5-1 as well. They beat Miami, but Miami sucks. So, that's, we won't go there. So, but outside of that, it's Duke, and I'm looking at Clemson, and I'm looking at Louisville. And those are the three teams right now. And then North Carolina is right there. They had a win today as well. Obviously North Carolina might be able to get one victory against Duke this year from just the rivalry sense, right? But it's really those teams, North Carolina, Louisville, Clemson. And then Duke is kind of in their own category, right? That's how you kind of look at the ACC. Duke is a lock, possible 1 seed, maybe 2 seed, probably a 1 overall, not 1 overall, but might be 1 overall, how everything lays out because of the SEC beating the crap out of each other. So then we start looking at, all right, who else in the AC might make the tournament? Louisville, Clemson, North Carolina, Wake Forest, right? Probably out of those, we might get 2. So who are those 2? That's what we're going to be looking at the rest of this year. Outside of that, there's really nobody else that's relevant in that conference. And they're relevant amongst themselves, but they're going to be punching their ticket to the NIT, or what's the other one? There's like 3
CBI.
Yeah, the CBI, DUI, whatever. I don't know.
Alphabet soup.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So at this point, but definitely have to give a lot of credit. Louisville is looking really tough, and I personally think Clemson is probably, if they keep it up, locked in as well, because they had a very solid non-conference beginning, if as long as they don't have like stupid bad losses, they should be okay. But Louisville could be one of those teams that sneaks in, and it could end up becoming, the problem for Hubert Davis in North Carolina if they keep it up. But pretty big surprise and great start for the Cardinal there for the ACC. There's really not much else to talk about in that conference because it's really down this year, man. It really is. As down as it's ever been.
Yep. Louisville has already played Duke and Carolina, so the schedule ahead for the Cardinals pretty favorable. So that is definitely something.
They're 1-1. They're 1-1.
Yep. They beat Carolina. They didn't get Duke, but they did beat Carolina. So Pat Kelsey just doing an outstanding job. That's getting noticed by everyone in the nation. All right, Ari, that's another big Saturday review show. Man, over 100 games. So much to talk about. We covered it all from college basketball coast to coast, literally from the WCC in Gonzaga to the Big East to the ACC to the SEC, and then, of course, in the heartland with the Big 12 and the Big 10. That's why we call it college basketball coast to coast. For Ari Russell, I'm Matt Zemek. Follow us on YouTube and follow us on Twitter as well. So coming at you every Saturday and trying to add some weekday shows. We did do a weekday show earlier this week. Just stay with us at College Basketball Coast to Coast on the road to the Final Four in San Antonio. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.